Welcome to episode 32 of the Ikario podcast. In this episode, we talk about toxic productivity. And we talk about this topic and we talk about why most people who are in toxic productivity mode, feel super busy, hustling all the time, why most people who are doing this are actually in denial about how busy they are and why they're actually wasting most of the time, even though they feel like they're always working on something super important.
We also point out 3 things to pay attention to as signals. So if you notice these 3 things in your life, you're going to know from this podcast that you're in unnecessary hustle mode, where you're working in such a way that's perhaps unproductive, way more tension than it needs to be, and unnecessarily stressful.
And of course, like usual, we try to make this as practical as possible. So we bring in practical examples from our own experience. And we talk about how you can actually maximize your effectiveness, how you can basically make sure that you are much better at being productive, which is really about like reaching your goals, right? You're much better at moving towards the goals that are important to you in your life. And you can do that while being less stressed and like being at much lower tension.
And if you stick around to the end, you'll hear me and Shane both answer a pretty ridiculous question. So stick around for that.
So that is episode 32. As usual, you can find the show notes for this episode on our website. You can go to ikario.com/032 for episode 32. That's ikario.com/032. And with that, let's get started.
Hello and welcome to the Ikario podcast, where we help you break free from the human zoo, optimize your life, and become a force to be reckoned with. Again with your hosts, myself, Ollie.
And I'm Shane.
And what are we talking about today, Shane?
So we're talking about toxic productivity, which I think is a good topic for us to take on because we have talked quite a bit about productivity and the importance of like, the way I like to think of it is not so much productivity, but the importance of becoming an implementer. So becoming someone who does what they say they're going to do and who does so very effectively. I think this is like a very basic building block, of gaining freedom, of being able to live the life you want to live. You want to make sure that you're someone who can, like I said, do what you say you're going to do. And while you're doing that, you don't want to be wasting your time, right? You don't want to be wasting your time. So that is where the productivity part comes in. It's about making sure that you're using your time well, that the time you spend on something is spent well, that you get to a result as quickly as possible, basically.
Okay, but obviously without overreaching, without overworking, without engaging in sort of meaningless busy work that stresses you out.
Yeah, for sure there's a dark side to that where the other side of it is basically like hustle culture and like you say, basically toxic productivity, where you can just become a workaholic. You can become overly focused on just performance and feeling like you have to do more and putting more pressure on yourself. And that is also something that obviously it's not healthy to do that. It's also like, I think this can happen especially with people who start, who either are very career oriented or start freelancing or something entrepreneurial, where the reason you started, right, the reason you wanted to advance your career or start freelancing or start a business is because you wanted to create more freedom for yourself, right? Like you want to be financially free, and you want to have maybe more time freedom. And we can lose sight of that in the hustle, Before you know, it's like 3 years later and you're working like all day, every day, you're stressed out of your mind. And it's like, hold on, the original reason you wanted to do this was to avoid exactly this, right? And that happens to a lot of people. That's kind of the flip side of it. And this is, of course, something to be avoided. And also, it's something that can be exploited. Because if you have a work environment where, in a toxic productivity culture, you can have this work environment where it's just expected that people work overtime. It's just normal Here, everyone works overtime. Everyone is stressed. That's normal. And also, you're not getting a raise this year, right?
You're describing my girlfriend's work
Yeah.
absolutely to a T.
Yeah.
It's like it's just expected that you work until, like your contract says 5, but you're not. That's not. You're not working just till 5. You're working way beyond that.
And you're not getting paid for it.
You're not getting paid for it. And if you are the exception, if you start saying no, the culture almost encircles you. And it's like, well, why are you different? Like, and then eventually you're shamed into, okay, well, I guess I either face the social repercussions in this workplace of doing that, or I just work a couple of extra hours. And for people who are more agreeably inclined, they're more likely to just keep working for no extra pay kind of thing.
Yeah, and also you're probably, a work culture where that kind of thing is expected, and where people basically, the people in charge are shamelessly asking you to work unpaid overtime. They're probably also going to just shamelessly replace you if you say like, no, I'm actually just going to do what the contract says.
Yeah. Yeah. So they'll just kick you out. But like hustle culture, as far as I can tell, in some areas, in some places on the internet, it's kind of been fetishized a little bit.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
It's like hashtag hustle kind of thing. And you got like your Gary V's and stuff.
Yeah, and I think it's something that, in a way, it makes sense, right? Because maybe I'm thinking this, not too long ago, I read this book called The Evolution of Desire, which is a book all about human mating behavior from an anthropological perspective. And so I think that's coloring my thinking a little bit right now. But, I'm thinking that, well, work ethic, like demonstrating work ethic, is something that is kind of a value, a signal of value, So it would make sense that there's this kind of, it's connected to a base drive that we have, where you think, look, if I can demonstrate that I can work hard, I can be productive, that means I have higher value as a potential mate, So that could be one reason, because why is that? Like, why does that even happen? Why does it happen that we have hustle culture, that's kind of revered, and we have almost people bragging about how much overtime they work and stuff like that, right? And there's also this funny thing about, CEOs, at least for a while, I don't know if that's still happening, but for a while, like, tech company CEOs, there would be this thing where they would kind of always insinuate or maybe drop in an interview or something just how much they work, where the idea is like, I only work, I don't even sleep, right? Where they paint this picture of themselves almost like to justify, this is why I have billions of dollars. This is why I get paid, 2,000 times more than the average person. It's because I work that much. But it's that, dude, you're not working 2,000 times more than the average person. Like, stop trying to justify it, But it's almost like this thing where it's maybe a justification, but also it's something like we lionize that, and it's almost like that has to be part of your image, If you're at the top of this company, it's like you have to be an extraordinarily hard worker who just leaves it all on the line and stuff like that. But yeah, why does that make sense, right? Why does that resonate in us? Maybe it has to do. Maybe it kind of comes back to mate value.
Yeah. Quite possibly, because I've often wondered about the glorification of busy in our culture.
Yeah, strange, right? But it's also a positive perspective or a positive angle on it is that it is like anti-aristocratic, because so a few hundred years ago, the thing you would have bragged about, if there had been Instagram at the time, what you would have bragged about is the fact that you don't work. And that you have, your hands are completely callus free, like you've never done a day's work and you don't intend to, because you're part of the aristocracy, And working is something that lower class people do. And so this is something that has changed in our culture, but that's not cool anymore. That's less something to brag about. Usually, even when someone shows off their wealth or usually they just pretend to have wealth that they don't have, right? But
yeah,
when someone, shows themselves in their rented Lambo or whatever, then the story is usually not, I'm just so rich because of my trust fund. Look at me. It's usually some part of it is like I've earned this because I hustle so hard.
I'm the 23-year-old CEO, self-made man.
Exactly, and I have a Lambo because I've earned it, and you can too. Buy my course, kind of thing.
Exactly, yeah. And it's like, what are the odds that as a 23-year-old CEO you have earned enough money to buy a Lambo? When did you start working? When did you start building your business? When you were 12?
Yeah. I mean, there's the rare occasion, right? It's like the Stripe founders are in their 20s, I think, still, or maybe in their early 30s now. But they were like very, very young billionaires, very young, and they earned it. Like Stripe is an amazing product, right? But it's very rare that happens in the real world. And I don't think they're posting Lambos on Instagram.
I was literally just about to say, on Instagram, are the Stripe founders swanning around in Lambos?
That'd be so funny.
and private jets and stuff.
Yeah, that'd be really funny if they were.
Yeah. But I'm curious as to what is there a middle ground here? Because the thing is, it's like there's two opposites here. You have the archetypal, knackered, red-faced, overweight, stressed out, suit-wearing person that's just working 80-hour weeks and they're miserable, they've got no time for their family and stuff. But on the other end of the spectrum, we have people whose work ethic is all over the map. It's inconsistent, and they can't apply themselves to things, and they struggle with motivation. They struggle to know what to do and how to do it. And usually with ikario stuff, we often try to navigate some sort of middle way. And I just wanted to know what your thoughts were on that, is like the middle way between being an absolute, busy workaholic and unmotivated. What does that kind of look like?
I think there are two problems here that we should deconstruct. The first problem is that it's obviously, so we've kind of painted the picture of, hustle culture, overworked and so on. Obviously, that's not great. You don't want to be there. But also, like you just mentioned, also don't want to be on the other side of the spectrum. If you're incapable of getting work done, if you're just whatever it is, you're unmotivated, or you don't have clear priorities, or you just don't have the tools to get work done, that doesn't put you in a great situation, And this is even like, that's just the world. That's just the reality of the world we live in. If that's the case, if you're someone who's, really unproductive, really struggles with this kind of thing, it's going to be a tough time for you, right? So you don't want to be there either. And that's one thing where we can kind of look at this as a spectrum and say, where's the ideal place to be, right? How can we have like enough but not too much of this productivity thing? There's another problem that maybe we can get to afterwards, which is, in some cases, the hustle is kind of an investment into a better future. Because if you want to do something like start a business, then realistically, it's going to take a lot of energy. You have to put a lot of energy into it for it to get escape velocity. And it might actually be a rational decision to say, for a few years, I'm just going to work like crazy. I'm basically going to sacrifice my free time and even maybe my health to some degree in order to get this thing off the ground, in order to then in the future have, a better life. And you also don't want to be in the situation where you are unwilling to do enough work to get something off the ground that could give you immense freedom in the future. So then again, you can't just categorically say, well, whenever you're hustling or whenever you're working more than 8 hours a day or something, that's always bad, right? So, but let's take these on in turn, right? If we just consider the spectrum from super unproductive to workaholic, essentially, where do you want to be here? I think that, one thing, anyone who's worried about, but I don't want to sacrifice productivity. Like the things I do are important to me. It usually feels, for anyone who's deep in the hustle, for anyone who's a workaholic, it feels like there's always more stuff to do than you can get around to, and everything is important. And you're basically in a position where you reject the idea, well, I should work less or I should take time off, because what about all this stuff? And anyway, I couldn't even relax if I took time off, because I just know that a million tasks are piling up, for me to, that I have to get back to as soon as I come back from my break, right? So this is not an option. Well, I think what's important to realize is that there's a huge difference between busyness and effectiveness. And from people I've worked with on the topic of like productivity, it is invariably true that most of the things that you think are super important are actually not that important, and that you're actually wasting lots and lots of your time. So the way I like to think of this is that if you're currently, let's say you're working like 14 hours a day, and the reality of the situation is that you want to consider it as you have some goals. You have goals, and you usually have more than one goal, but some of these goals are more important than others. And the reality is that a lot of the work you do is not moving you towards those goals very effectively. A lot of the work you do is maybe just kicking the can down the road on something that's, it's just perpetual. And you're not doing anything to stop that perpetual loop of constantly having to come back to do the same thing. And a lot of it is essentially busy work, So it's like you have a goal of growing a business. Again, I usually use this as an example because obviously I've worked as an entrepreneur for ages, so that's kind of my reference point. It's like you have a goal of building a business and getting to the point, let's say from solo to the point where you can actually start hiring people and start outsourcing or automating some of your processes. And you're working 14 hours a day, but most of the work you do is not actually moving you closer to the point where you can say, now I can hire someone. Now I can start, removing myself from this business. And a lot of the work is stuff that really, really feels important until you say no to it. Until you just say, no, I'm just not going to do this. And instead, I'm going to do higher priority stuff. And I'm going to spend less time doing stuff that feels urgent and more time doing stuff that is actual high priority stuff that moves me towards my most important goals. And so there you often find that a lot of your time is spent on stuff that feels important but isn't. And once you stop doing it, you realize that it wasn't as important as it ever felt. And the other thing is that you're just not effective. Like no human being can consistently do 14 hours of deeply focused, highly effective work a day. It's just not possible. And so realistically, you could probably make a lot of progress on your most important goals in like, let's say 4 hours of focused work every day. And then you would still have enough like gas in the tank for another 4, 5, 6 hours of less important work. And after that, you're just so far into diminishing returns, you might as well just stop. Right? Because you can still sit there in front of your laptop and do work-like stuff. You'll still look busy, but you're just not getting anywhere with this. And again, this is where like an illusion of productivity, where for many people, if you actually reduce your work hours, and because what you're doing is you're doing 0 hours of deeply focused, highly effective work. You're constantly in this, it's like you're constantly running on fumes, right? And you're just about scraping by. And the reality is that if you took more time off and invested more time into deeply focused, important work and a bit of time into busy work, you would actually make way more progress than you're doing right now in fewer work hours. So there, it's also, and but it's also difficult for people to break free from that, But that's the reality of what most like workaholic type work looks like. It is very, very far from actually productive work. And a simple way to think of it is like, what is your actual productive output? Because that's what matters. Your actual productive output is X, and you're sitting here 14 hours a day in front of your laptop, looking busy. And the truth is you could get the same amount of output. In most cases, you could get far more productive, important output in fewer hours. That's the reality of it. And that's hard to face when you're in the middle of this, workaholic mode.
Yeah. Yeah, there's been something that that I guess I've just been adjusting to as my work situation has become more and more free, I guess. It's the stepping away of equating your work with the amount of hours.
Yeah.
Because it's something I now have resistance to. Mm-hmm. Because it's like, okay, oh, I've worked for 6 hours today, 7 hours. I'm not interested in that. Not for myself or anyone else. It's more like, what did you do?
Yeah.
What did you get completed? How did we move towards our goals? And it makes me think, because the last time we ran Focus and Action, which for those that don't know, Focus and Action is a 9-week online community-driven course to help you, achieve the results that Shane just spoke about, which is to do more work, get more done in 4 hours than you used to getting done in, I don't know, 12.
Yeah. Whatever the normal is now. Yeah.
Yeah, whatever that is. But yeah, what I noticed on the last Focus and Action was that some people, they were like pretty quickly reaching a point where they were completing usually a week's worth of tasks on a Tuesday, by Tuesday.
Yeah.
And then we'd have a call, and then they'd be expressing that they're actually, it feels strange.
It's like, I don't know what to do now.
Yeah. And they're like, okay, well, do I take on more? And then a couple of people said that they just find themselves, sort of tinkering around at the laptop because they feel guilty. They feel like they've not done enough. And I thought, well, that's a very interesting obstacle, isn't it? Because that just kind of shows that if we've done something for long enough, we'll just find a reason to keep it going, even when it's like, no. Look, listen, you've done more by Tuesday than you used to getting done all week. Like, you don't need to add more work to it to justify the 3 days that you can take a bit easier. Yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, I just find it quite interesting how busyness as a habit can kind of ensnare you.
Yeah, and it's also just a habit of sitting there in front of your computer. And this is also something for me, I noticed, during the pandemic with all the lockdowns and stuff, has gotten worse for me. Or just the habit of just sitting in front of my computer has locked in more than it was before. Before I had more of a habit of stepping away and doing things, whereas now it's like, well, what are you going to do? For so long, it was always like, you can't go out. So you're just still sitting there.
Yeah.
And so I've also noticed that I've gotten worse at that again, where I'm just sitting there doing, just out of pure habit, out of sheer habit and kind of lack of alternative. I'm just still sitting there, even though it's no longer useful.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's not as if you're working. It's just, you just sat as a habit.
Yeah. And another thing, it's actually just happened to me just before we started recording. I think it pays to pay attention to this kind of thing, because I was basically doing some research. I was learning stuff, and I was reading this article, and I'd been doing that for several hours already. I was basically doing research or learning or whatever you want to call it for several hours. And I was reading this article, and at one point I realized, I was reading and I was like, this is not going in, right? I'm reading this paragraph and I can't make sense of this anymore, right? So I basically ran out of capacity to learn more stuff. And I just stopped reading the article midway through when I realized this. And this is also one of those things. Of course, I can force myself to sit there, and either I can just read, I could just read all the paragraphs and nothing sticks, but then I, can check it off the thing. I read the article. Well, what's the use of that? Or I can somehow, try to force myself to actually get what this thing is saying, which it would probably slow me down to like a half or a third of my usual speed. So then I'm sitting there for another hour doing like 20 minutes of work, Well, but what's the point? I can just recognize, okay, I've reached capacity for today. Or maybe all it takes is like an hour break, and then I can come back to it. But just the realization of, look, continuing to do what I'm doing is just not worth it. It's just like it's a bad trade, right? It's like I'm trading like 3 minutes of my time for 1 minute of input, because I basically run out of focus, because I've run out of capacity. And just recognizing, listen, at this point, I might as well. At this point, it's probably more productive for me to just go for a walk and do nothing. And then, yeah, like I said, if it's really important, maybe after half an hour, maybe after an hour, I come back and I've kind of recharged enough. Now I can take it in again. And if I take a 1 hour break and then do another hour of reading, I'll probably learn more than if I force myself to keep going for another 2 hours. But one looks more productive than the other, right?
Yeah.
One looks more like I have more work ethic and more hustle than the other. But again, then it's like, look, what are you doing this for? I'm not doing this to try and look busy, right?
But who would you try and look busy for?
Yeah, which is great. I mean, that's also a good point. Like, I have that freedom, right? I'm not working in an environment where looking busy is important, right? Which not everybody has that freedom. But I think that's also just something that's really important to realize and to notice. And it's true for your productive output. It's true for your learning. It's true for basically everything, right? It's like our focus gets exhausted after a while, and it's just pointless to force it after that point.
Yeah. So obviously for you that applied to reading, but you can easily just apply that to work as well.
Mm-hmm. And it happens with work too, right? It's like, this is also something, again, like this is, it's like a not hustle culture thing, because like sometimes I have a plan of, let's say I want to record this video today, and I start working on it, and the same thing happens. I get to the point where I just realize I'm running on fumes, right? It's like maybe it's late in the day. I've already done a bunch of things, and I just realize, like, yes, of course I can force myself to finish this. Like I can go through the motions and finish this video and check it off the list, but the video won't be very good because I've noticed that I've gotten to this point of diminishing returns, and it's much better to say, which again, like for many people, this would be a productivity sin. Oh, this was on your to-do list for today and you're not doing it, right? You're letting yourself down. What would David Goggins say or whatever? And it's like, but for me, it's like, no, it's the right thing to do is to say, I'm going to stop now and I'm going to make a better video tomorrow in less time.
So it's obviously, again, that's just more about your effectiveness, what you're producing, as opposed to the amount of time you spend doing it.
Yeah, because my priority is to make a good video, or to deliver a good piece of work, and not to put in a fixed amount of hours. Now, for people who work in an office environment or something like that, right, where you have to clock in and clock out, this is much more difficult.
Yeah.
But what I would say there, what I think you can still do is you can try to organize your time in such a way that you are doing as much as possible. You're doing like concentrated bursts of working on actually important stuff, and then do your slacking off. Like, I think in a lot of work environments, it's like a constant mix of busy work and slacking off, So it's like you have your email tab open and you have your Facebook tab open, and you're kind of switching between the two all day. And so you're always working at like this 10% capacity, And instead, if at all possible, try to organize your work time in such a way that you're doing a few hours of only focused important work, and then slack off, just go all in on slacking off for the rest of the time, right? And because if you work in that environment, you've already perfected slacking off while looking busy, and everybody has, right? That's the first skill that people learn. And so, but again, even there, you can like be committed to what you do instead of constantly being in that gray zone of doing neither.
Yeah, that's a good point. So even if you were, say, working 8 hours, you can still kind of implement the focused work principle, even though you're not fully in charge of, the time you're at work. You can say, right, you could do 2 90-minute kind of focused deep work sessions a day, and then the rest of the time just slack off. So you're still bringing the principle of effectiveness into.
That's what I would try. Yeah, that's what I would try. Obviously, like in some cases, there will be work culture that sabotages this. But I like also Cal Newport wrote about this in Deep Work, where he's like, look, I understand that most work cultures are not very compatible with the idea of deep work. But what you can do is you can negotiate. Negotiate with your manager, with your boss or whatever, and basically tell them, listen, for me to do my work most effectively, here's what I need. And that means that during this window of time in the day, I'm not going to instantly answer every message that's sent to me. I'm not going to be able to do impromptu meetings and so on. It's like, but instead of just putting up with it, like have that negotiation with someone saying, like, are you going to agree to give me this undistracted time in exchange for me being able to do my best work? Or do you want to pay me to do not my best work? And I think that, I think basically I would refer to that. He describes this in a bit more detail. I think that's at least worth trying for people who are in like a really shitty environment in terms of allowing them to actually be productive.
Yeah. I'm sure, Shane, you've got plenty more tips in that regard, but I urge the audience that to remember, Shane would make a horrific employee.
That is true. I'm unemployable. I was a really bad employee. I was a very, very bad employee. Yeah, I wouldn't want to hire me.
Yeah, basically take some of Shane's advice in this regard with a pinch of salt. You might get your boss might sack you.
Yeah, that's true. But yeah, the other thing is let's also talk about this second problem basically of what if. So because I'm talking here about all this being highly focused and productive and taking breaks and so on, but the truth is that I spent at least 3 years, I would say, in like workaholic mode. Like in the early days of my entrepreneurial journey. So, and I also felt that especially early on, this really was one of my strengths, is that I could just I could get things done with like sheer work ethic and sheer work volume. It's like I was willing to work longer and harder than my competition in a way. And the thing is, so then, I don't want to be a hypocrite and basically tell people to live more like I live now, when part of the reason for my success is that I was hustling super hard for a quite long time. And so here's how I see this, or this is basically the problem. Like, the question is, could I have achieved the level of financial freedom I have now without doing that kind of hustle? And I think, like I said before, in some cases, it's just true that a project requires this energy to achieve escape velocity that maybe just isn't going to happen with your 4-hour workday,
Yeah.
So what do we do about this? And I think that there's a bit of a problem with theory and practice here, because I think that I'm absolutely certain that I could have achieved everything I achieved while hustling less, but I could have done so with all of the knowledge and the experience that I have now. So part of the reason I was working so hard and I was basically a workaholic is because of all kinds of inefficiencies, right? It's like this was early in my journey. I didn't know what I was doing most of the time. And of course I can look back now and say, oh, there's all this stuff that I didn't have to do. I could have prioritized better. I could have organized my time better and so on. And I could have definitely achieved the same without being a workaholic. But the thing is, the reason I can say that now is because of everything I've experienced in hindsight, right? In hindsight, I can see it.
Yeah.
And I think this is part of the problem, or this is where the theory and the practice kind of clashes. Because I think often a big reason why the early stages of a startup are so difficult is because it's like you're paying your dues in all the mistakes you're making, right? It's like you're learning, and you mainly learn by doing things wrong and then realizing, oh crap, I did this wrong, and then you start doing it better.
Yeah.
And so the idea that you're going to be like, you're not going to be perfectly executing at the beginning of a project like this. And even though it would be theoretically possible to perfectly identify all the things that are important and discard all the things that are unimportant and only do those things, that's just not how it works, because you just don't know yet how to set these kinds of priorities. You don't know all this stuff yet that you're going to learn in the first few years of making all kinds of mistakes, right?
Yeah.
So I think that's really where this advice can kind of break down. I think it's still worth attempting it, right? It's better to try and set clear goals and priorities and do deeply focused work and so on than not to try. But the reality is that early on, in the early stages of a project, your execution is just not going to be flawless, and you might have to make up for some of that flawed execution with just more volume. And that's the reality of it, right? So that's where I would also say, like, I don't think that hustling super hard and basically think of it as sacrificing, right? You're making sacrifices in terms of like your social life and in terms of kind of work-life balance and so on. You're sacrificing these things in order to get a business off the ground, for example, right? And I think I can't say that's the wrong thing to do. I think that sometimes that's the right thing to do, especially if you're young, relatively young, and you don't have, you're unmarried, you don't have a family and so on. that means you can actually afford to do that. You can actually say, you know what, I'm just going to sacrifice a couple of years of my life, like on the altar of entrepreneurial progress. And that's not a bad choice. But what's still important is that you still got to make sure that the sacrifice is not in vain. So because that's another thing where a lot of entrepreneurs end up failing is, for example, kind of bouncing between different opportunities too much, right? Where it's like you're changing your mind about what exactly you're going to do too often. You kind of bounce from one thing to the next. And so even though you're putting in all the hours, you're putting in all this work, again, any single project is not getting enough energy to achieve escape velocity, right? It's like you have this business idea, you go, oh, I'm going to do this. You put in some work, and then you go, oh, but what about this? And you start doing this too, and then maybe you do both in parallel and so on. That's not going to work, right? And also you have to make sure that you're actually learning and not just, and I think this is one of the tricky things as well, is like, how do you tell the difference between I'm going in the right direction, but it's the early stages, so there's not much in terms of results to show yet, because even if you have a brilliant business idea, even if you're doing the right things, like in the first weeks and months, there's probably going to be nothing to show for it, right? It's like if you ask the entrepreneur who's doing all the right things and the entrepreneur who's doing all the wrong things, if you ask them like a few months into their journey, like, what results have you gotten? Both of them were basically, well, none, pretty much none, right? And so how do you tell? How can you make sure that you're actually on the right path? And that's I think where it becomes really important to get to try and get some kind of feedback, right? So that you're not just, I think the mistake that you can make is that you simply have an idea in your head where you think this is the thing I need to do, and you stubbornly pursue that, and you don't look for and even ignore signals from the outside world that maybe tell you, hold on, maybe this isn't right. Versus someone who has an idea but then seeks to confirm that idea, looks for feedback, and that can be feedback just from other people, right? It's like kind of get feedback from the outside, but also like you seek to find, early customers, you seek to test your idea somehow, you seek some kind of confirmation that you're going in the right direction. And so that you're making sure that all the effort you're putting in is not wasted.
Mm-hmm. So this is in relation to say starting a new entrepreneurial venture.
Yeah.
I mean that's the frame that you're basically coming from.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know how, again, like I'm sure that the same can be said for many careers, right? Where you have to put in a lot of effort early on to kind of rise through the ranks, and then later on it pays off. But I just have zero experience with that. So I can't really say how that works.
Yeah, can't really comment.
Yeah.
So just so I know I'm on the right page.
Mm-hmm.
It's like you're not saying that, like you're saying that yes, if you could go back in time and make some tweaks from where you're at now, you're confident that with what you know now, you could totally achieve the results that you got now.
Yeah.
With less friction and hustle.
Yeah.
But you're also acknowledging that, hang on, it was initially through the failures that I learned what I know now. So it's kind of like,
yeah, it's a bit of a chicken and egg situation.
Yeah.
And it's, and another thing, actually, I think another factor that's really easy to implement, right? To make sure you're kind of on the right side of the equation here is like, make sure that none of it is demonstrative. So the moment, it's kind of a clear sign, the moment the reason you're doing something is because, your boss is watching and you need to look busy, that's, that you're wasting your time. If the reason is I have to look busy, then you're wasting your time, guaranteed. And the same is like if you're doing something because, maybe you're kind of in a hustle culture bubble on social media or something, and you've just gotten this impression, right? You've gotten the impression that that's what everyone does. Everybody brags about how hard they work and so on. And I want to do that too. And it's kind of like, this is what I do to fit in here, right? So I'm basically socially signaling. So I'm doing this in order to socially signal how late I worked and so on. Again, that's a guaranteed signal that you're on the wrong path. if you're doing it in order to socially fit in, that is not the right reason to be working long. And so that, I think, is also something to just pay attention to, just like I mentioned before with like the attention fading, right? If you notice that you're fading, if you notice that your effectiveness is going down, like pay attention to that and intervene when that happens. And similarly, as soon as you're doing something for kind of social, to score social points or something like that, pay attention to that and intervene.
So you're checking the intention behind what it is that you're doing, and you're checking the power and the sort of potency of your attention span with it as well.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's like you can, because this is like the toxic positivity thing, is that's one of the things that makes it toxic. No, sorry, toxic productivity.
I thought that's what you meant.
Yeah. One of the things that makes it toxic is when it becomes like a competition, you know, when it's not just me working away because there's this project I believe in because it's important to me and so on. No, it's some kind of a competition of, am I seemingly more productive than someone else? Am I, hustling harder? Do I have a more perceived work ethic than someone else? That's one of the things that makes it toxic.
Because like competitive suffering.
Yeah, it's like competitive suffering.
Yeah. It reminds me of this. There's a Monty Python skit called the Four Yorkshiremen, and there's basically the sketch. I'm going to butcher it, so I was already anticipating me butchering this before I brought it up. But essentially, the crux of it is there's four guys, they're like old Yorkshiremen. They got a pint, they're in pub kind of thing, and one of them says, "Oh, I got up at 6, and then another one's like, 6? That's a luxury. I got up at 5. And then they keep going for about 5 minutes until now it gets into a ridiculous point where they're talking about the childhood, and about they got beaten, and that this guy got up half an hour before he went to bed, and it becomes really bizarre, and there's just this competitive suffering. And it's quite funny for me because I have actually witnessed that in conversation before. Like people, and I often just want to intervene. I was like, sorry guys, what are you doing? What are the rules of the game here? Do you think that the more you suffer, it kind of makes you cool or interesting or something?
And it's funny, right? Because somehow there's like a social incentive for that,
There must be. Otherwise, they won't be all competing in this way. Yeah. But it's quite, I find it quite funny. But we've mentioned a few, you did mention a few practicalities there. And I just wonder if we have anything else in terms of like practical, because what the intention, as far as I can tell, is that we're saying here is you want to be super effective, but you also don't want to reach a point where you're just unnecessarily burning out and stressed to the eyeballs and ineffective. Yeah. And you've mentioned in the past, and we've mentioned on previous podcasts, the concept of sort of high performance, low tension. Yeah. And I just wonder if you had anything else that's kind of practical that's on your mind, some things you may have learned along the way. Yeah.
So what you just mentioned, that high performance, low tension, this is the idea that in most cases you can actually unfold your highest potential under low tension. So when you, and this is something that, we all know from, maybe you get nerves, let's say you have to give a presentation and you get all nervous about it, you get all tense about it. Well, that tension isn't helping you give a better presentation, right? If you were relaxed, you would actually give a better presentation. Yeah. So the tension doesn't help. And this is true for most things, right? Anything you want to do, like if you want to be able to, be creative, or any kind of knowledge work where you have to recall things, you have to kind of use your knowledge well, and you have to be creative and so on. All of these things, like you're going to do better if you're relaxed. Your performance is going to be better if you're relaxed. And it's also true for a lot of physical stuff, right? It's like if you basically the more tense you are, the worse it's going to get, the worse your performance is going to get. And so that is true that means that if you are in this state of high tension because you're super stressed, because you feel like you have to be performing and you're always behind and so on and so forth, right? And you didn't get enough rest and so on. These are all things that kind of increase your tension, increase your stress levels, and that at the same time lowers your performance. And so it becomes a vicious cycle, because the lower your performance, the more you feel like you're not doing enough, you're not catching up with your endless to-do list and so on. The more pressure you put on yourself, the worse your performance gets, and so on. And so again, the very thing that makes you think, well, I can't possibly take a break. Look at the size of my to-do list and so on. Well, the truth is that if you took a break and you actually managed to lower your tension a little bit, you could come back and do much better. But yeah, you can be trapped in a vicious cycle. And the other thing that I think is also worth paying attention to is also just your level of self-honesty about what you're doing. Because like we mentioned, if you're sitting there doing work for 14 hours a day, the reality is you're not doing effective work for 14 hours a day. And the question is, can you be honest with yourself about that? Can you identify, here are the portions of the day where I'm doing unimportant stuff. Here are the portions of the day where I'm basically, I'm running on like 10% of my capacity and stuff like that. Or do you have to kind of lie to yourself and tell yourself the story that, no, I'm working super hard, 14 hours a day. All of this is necessary. None of this can be cut. And none of it is my fault. And I'm such a, have pity me and also admire me at the same time and all this kind of stuff, right? If you have to maintain this story somehow, then you're also deceiving yourself. And that takes away your ability to notice things like, oh, right now I'm actually not doing anything important. Or right now, my attention is faded. I'm not working well anymore, right? If you're attached to the story, that I think goes along with a lot of the hustle culture and workaholic kind of thing, then you are going to blind yourself to the opportunities you have to improve the way you work, because you have to maintain this story and this self-image.
Okay, that's pretty perfect. I mean, the I guess I wrote down a few suggestions for myself, because I've started implementing this with one of my private clients. It's like, at the end of every quarter, have a week off, because that week allows you to. Well, first of all, it serves a couple of functions. Like one of them is that you have something to look forward to at the end of the quarter. You have a week where you go somewhere new. You fill that week full of activities you want to do, or things you don't, or just completely just switch
chill
off.
In a hammock.
And just do what the hell you want. You know that at the end of this quarter, you've got that coming, which is cool and motivating. The other reason why this is a good idea is that you can use that time to reflect a little bit on the previous quarter, on what it is you've done, how did it go, etc. Because that kind of saves you just settling into poor habits, and through a lack of self-reflection and self-awareness, you're just continuing to engage in poor work habits and stuff, just month in, month out, without really noticing. So that's another practical takeaway, practical tip I kind of had written down. So
another thing that comes to mind that might have, one of the ways I think about this is that for both your personal productivity and also for something like managing a team or building a business or something like that, you can think of it as like you're building an engine. And what you want is an engine that runs really efficiently and smoothly. And so if you have a business, and whether that is, maybe you're just a freelance solopreneur, or maybe there's lots of people working with you, doesn't matter. If you have a business where it takes a huge amount of workload and stress, and at the end of the month, like, you can barely cover your costs, and so you're in this kind of situation where it's like, we can't pay people well, and everybody has to do overtime and so on and so forth, right? To keep this going. Well, that's an extremely inefficient engine. Okay, and this is something we shouldn't put up with, because it's not necessary. And that's also like, look for examples of highly efficient whatever it is that you want to do. Look for examples of like, who's doing this really efficiently. And again, if we take a business, right, you can easily find businesses that work exactly like that, right? It's like even though everybody's stressed and overworked and so on, they're still in financial trouble, basically. They can barely keep paying the bills. But there are other businesses that are just absolutely flush with cash, where basically they have more money than they know what to do with. That's the other extreme, right? Where the business is so effective and it generates so much income, and it, without having to scale to like, huge offices and loads of employees and so on. No, it's like lean, and it works, and it's efficient, and it produces all this income, right? So clearly that's possible. And so for me, it's like, as the designer of this business, that has to be the goal. I'm not going to put up with an ineffective business, an inefficient business, and just be like, oh, that's just how it is. I don't want that for myself, and I don't want that for people who work for me either. And it's the same for my own, even if we remove the business context, if you just think of my own habits, my own life, how do I design my habits and my schedule and so on? Again, we can think of this as an engine, and like, how efficiently does this engine run? And clearly it's possible to be super stressed, super high tension, miserable and so on. But what are you doing? What are you producing? Well, not much. So it's like you're burning all this fuel for almost nothing. But it's also possible to be highly, highly effective and to kind of run smoothly and have a high output without all this suffering. And that's where I want to be. And I know that's possible. And so I'm not going to put up with this kind of low efficiency model, right? For me, if I realize that I'm running my engine super inefficiently, to me, that's a design problem that can be solved, and I want to solve it. I'm not just going to put up with that. So that's another thing with the whole hustle culture, instead of, because I think that's often the case, that people kind of just shrug and say, oh, this is just how it is, and they complain about it and stuff, right? It's like, no, I don't want to live like this.
Yeah.
And this is a solvable problem. I'm going to solve it, right?
It's like an engine been running without oil for ages.
Yeah.
It's all smashed up. It'll run. It'll get you from A to B slowly, inefficiently, at great risk of breaking down.
Yeah.
But it's as if there's loads of people that are saying, oh, well, this is just what engines are like.
Yeah.
Like, no, motherfucker, you put oil in it. Are you mad?
Yeah.
It's like, no, engines.
And it's just like insisting on this kind of, this can be solved, and I'm going to solve it. And even if it's frustrating, even if it's slow, right, it's usually not a quick fix. But I'm just going to keep at it until this problem is solved.
Cool. I have, before we move on to the next section, I have, I just wondered if you had a single book recommendation related to this topic. And my book recommendation actually is Essentialism by Greg
McKeown. Yeah.
McKeown. There's a W in there somewhere. And it's the idea, the basic idea of the book is less but better.
Yeah.
It's like, trim away what's unnecessary, you're left with what's essential, and then double down on making the essential better. That's I've condensed the whole book down to a single principle.
He would be proud of you.
Yeah. Yeah, he would. You've been essentialist with that. But if I was to recommend a book on this topic to help you have greater performance and lower tension just in life in general, not just productivity, then Essentialism would be it for me. Any books that spring out to your mind?
Yeah, I would say the one I already mentioned, The Deep Work by Cal Newport. And I would say that especially if you're listening to this episode and you're like kind of skeptical, and if you still have that story in your mind, no, well, for me it's different, for me it really is like this, blah, 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 right? Because I'll tell you, the reason I didn't like Deep Work is because it spends like half of the book or even more just convincing you of the importance of deep work. And I was like, yeah, I get it. I'm already on board with this.
20 pages in, it's like, I get it. Another 100 pages. Deep work's good. It's like,
exactly.
Calm down.
So for me, that was something that I found a little annoying about the book. But I understand why he does it, because people do push back against this quite a lot. So I think that for anyone who's skeptical of this, Deep Work is really good, because it'll just hammer it home with so many examples from so many different people, different historical figures, different types of work and so on. It's just like all these examples of, look, here's all the examples of how deep work is so much more effective than what we usually do. And so I think that can be a great book for people who feel like I'm the exception, it doesn't apply to me.
Yeah, that book actually helped me. It helped me, I guess, recognize something different about the whole corporate thing. It's like if you're in a corporate job, if you're working working for a boss or whatever, it may well be the case that if you try to rock the boat and change the status quo and work in your own way, it may well be the case that the culture just isn't flexible enough to accommodate it and you'll get kicked out. But it's also a possibility that you take an initiative and actively attempting to sort of reinvent things for the better shows initiative, And it may well be the case that actually gets noticed.
Yeah.
Rather than you just going, oh, everyone else works this way, so do I. How shit is it? Like, no, I've noticed like loads of inefficiencies. Can I do something different? I'll be more valuable to you.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. If I was a manager or a boss with half a pulse, and I'd be more likely to go, oh, actually, tell me more.
Mm.
But then again, you get assholes in that world. So.
Sure, yeah. It really depends on the culture, but I think it's worth it's worth trying. And I'm not a fan of like putting up with stuff. But again, I'm terrible employees, so don't listen to me.
Yeah. Okay, so in this next little segment of the podcast, I thought I'd introduce just something that helps our listeners get a bit of a feel for what it is that we're working on and how exactly. So obviously we are on the Ikario team, some self-development junkies, and we're always kind of working on something or another. We're always looking at improving this aspect of our life, this another aspect. We always have a kind of a focus at any given time. So I figured it'd be cool just to change pace a little bit and ask you what you're currently focusing on. Like, is it like anything to do with your fitness, anything to do with diet, relationships? What's taking up your focus in the self-development?
Yeah,
moment.
For me, it's like this. It's basically learning. I'm kind of on a learning tear right now, and it's basically this. So in our How to Get Your Shit Together series, one of the episodes was about finance and financial freedom, right? And that's kind of a good primer as to why finance is important for me. For me, money is basically a proxy for freedom, and freedom is super important for me. And in the last, I guess it's like the last 2 years or so now, I have gotten more into investing and more into like understanding the world of finance. And this is something like, because I would rather not have to deal with money at all. Right? I don't like it. And I don't have an affinity for numbers or anything like that. So I'd rather not think about it and rather not have to deal with it. But I've experienced some things in the last 2 years that made me realize just how incredibly naive I was about how money works and how the world of finance works. And it's one of those things where I think that, we talk about leverage, and this is just a field of knowledge with such immense leverage. If you are financially illiterate, that puts you at such an incredible disadvantage. Or actually the flip side of it, because most people are financially illiterate, the flip side is if you are financially literate, if you actually understand what's going on and you can make a few good decisions about finance in your life, that puts you at such an incredible advantage over almost everyone else. And so because of this, I have decided that I really want to do kind of a sprint of trying to understand more of finance, including the stuff that I really struggle, right? This is stuff that I really struggle with. It doesn't come easy to me, and I'm not intrinsically motivated to learn this stuff. But I'm just like, look, this is so important. I do not want to be. It's also like, I don't want to be on the receiving end of this, because I think that basically the world of finance basically works like this. There's very few people in kind of an elite class who are moving lots and lots of money around to the detriment of everyone else. And like 2008 was the best example of this, right? It's just people, absolute degenerate level gambling with billions of dollars of junk derivatives until the entire housing market collapses. And all the people who were involved in this didn't really suffer any severe punishment. The people who suffered were everyone who didn't have any idea what the fuck was going on. Right? People, the more financially illiterate you were in the run-up to the housing bubble and crash, the worse off you were. Those are the people who lost their homes, who ended up like neck deep in debt and so on, right? It's like, that is real suffering of the everyday person. And because of their financial illiteracy, it's like, of course you can point fingers at them and blame them because it's like you signed this contract that you shouldn't have signed. But why did you sign it? Because you were financially illiterate. And the guy on the other side of the counter, your banker or whatever, said, no, don't worry about it. Just, this is good,
Yeah.
And it's like at the expense of God knows how many people, like the financial elite essentially goes and gambles away the world economy, It's like, I don't want to be on the receiving end of that anymore, right? And so, that's basically what I've been doing. I'm just trying to absorb as much knowledge about this as possible to try to give myself like an asymmetric advantage, for whatever the next time is we collectively get kicked in the balls by Wall Street.
Yeah. So I guess you're learning this so that when you get kicked in the balls by Wall Street again, at least you've got a groin guard on.
Yeah, pretty much.
Rather than just bare balls like most people. Bare balls from a big boot with a steel toe cap. Yeah.
Anyway,
That seems damn worthwhile. I mean, yeah. And currently what I'm working on is implementing some habits, but like back on the habit tracking vibe again, using Know Me, which is an app that you recommended. Because there was another app called Fabulous. And that looked pretty good. It keeps getting advertised to me, so I was like, well.
So how did you like it? I used that for a while too. Yeah,
I jumped on it for a couple of days, I think. And it is good, but the thing is, it was trying to guide me down certain paths too much. It's like, yeah, you should do this in the morning. It's like, hey, I'm not getting an app tell me what to do in the morning, right?
Yeah.
And I just figured that Know Me just gives you more customization and stuff. You can track literally everything, not just the good apps, good habits.
Yeah.
Just like the things that you want to avoid and want to get a better track of. So I've been implementing that, but with the perspective of a bit of self-compassion, like not expecting me to tick this habit every single day and to remember to do Know Me every single day, but just to sort of get some data and adjust my habits accordingly. And I've been getting a bit of a kick out of that, to be honest.
Cool. Yeah.
We'll see how long it lasts, because I've done habit trackers before, and eventually using the habit tracker becomes a habit that you've got to implement.
Yeah.
So that's why I'm not cracking the whip on myself too much. Like if I've used Know Me today, then that's good. Then I'll keep doing that.
Step by step, yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah, the Fabulous app, I used it, it's a few years ago, but I used it for quite a while. And I think a lot of it is brilliant. It's really well done and stuff. But I had the same problem. Like after a while, I was like, I kind of want to do my own habits and not the ones that you tell me to do.
Yeah.
But I think we should still link it in the show notes and stuff, because I think it's worth a try.
For sure. Fabulous were telling me to drink a water in the morning. It was like, say, right, first thing you need to do is drink a water in the morning. Do that for 3 days. I'm like, God damn it, you're right.
Yeah.
I don't usually do that.
Yeah. I forgot but that's probably where I started that, because that's what I do as well as one of my first habits. I must have started there. Yeah.
Yeah, I included it in Know Me.
Yeah.
And the thing is, I did this 7-day free trial, did 2 days and quit because I was like, oh, Know Me, I'll get used to that. And then it emailed me saying, hey, sorry you left. Here's the 30-day free trial. It's like, haha, there you go.
So that's right. It's a free tip how to get a fabulous 30-day free trial, right?
There's a tip. Yes. Okay. Let me just repeat that. So sign up on Fabulous for 7 days, quit after 2 days, wait for the email to come through that says, here's the 30-day free trial instead. So that's how you get a free 30-day free trial on Fabulous. I might implement that, actually. It's free. Feck it. I might do it.
Do the 30 days. I think that it's a cool app, and I do the 30 days. That's a good idea.
Yeah, I think I'm going to do that. Okay, so the final segment of today's episode is a ridiculous question. Shane.
Yeah.
Would you rather fight 100 duck-sized horses or one horse-sized duck?
So I've already done this one, man. We did ridiculous questions at the end of Thrive Themes videos at one point, and this was one of them.
Okay.
And
I've not heard the answer.
Yeah. So my answer is still the same. It's for sure one horse-sized duck, because 100 duck-sized horses, I think that you have to consider the psychological aspect of like having to fight 100 of anything. Even if you can stomp out 100 little horses, it's like that's going to be traumatizing, you know. And I'd rather figure like a horse-sized duck is like given enough time to prepare you could definitely figure out how to take down a horse-sized duck, and I'd rather just have the experience of having like strangled one huge duck than some weird ass like nightmare-inducing scenario of having somehow killed 100 little horses. It's like, that's
true. that is true. But what if these duck-sized horses? What if they were like utterly evil? What if they had red eyes and they were like like horses from hell kind of thing? They were dark. They had flames up somewhere. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean that still like
still slightly adorable. Still wouldn't.
No, even if they're not adorable, it's just like imagine like 100 is a lot. It's just like you're going to be spending a lot of time. I feel like it's just be psychologically way more scarring.
Yeah, fair. I mean, do you think you'd win against 100 duck-sized horses as opposed to one horse-sized duck?
It really that depends a lot on like the other conditions of this, right? It's like, yeah, what am I fighting them bare-handed and what's going on?
Fair.
I don't know. It's like I feel like with duck-sized horses, it's like if you just wear boots, they basically can't do anything, right? Because what can they do? They can like bite you or something. They can't reach any further than the like mid shin, So what are they going to do?
They could kick you.
But they're tiny. I don't know.
I mean, 100 of them.
Yeah,
like a pile of horses just kicking at you. I mean, I don't think that'd work. It's not as if they can all kick at once.
Yeah.
You'd only be dealing with maybe.
I mean, I think a one horse-sized duck is probably more dangerous. It's probably more dangerous.
I mean, I think without a doubt.
Yeah.
Because as well, to fight 100 duck-sized horses, you better have some good stamina.
That's true.
Because there's a lot of kicking, a lot of swinging your boots around.
Basically, both of these things are not desirable. Like, can I do neither of these things?
No,
right?
Absolutely not.
I don't want to.
It's coming, Shane. The day is coming for any of us. But my final answer to this is I'd like to fight a horse-sized duck because I feel like the MMA fighter in me is more like I'd rather have a one-on-one showdown with something than just hundreds of little things.
Yeah,
I'm
that
like,
doesn't seem right.
I mean, I'm pretty sure I'd get screwed up big time.
Oh, think about it too, like reputationally, if you stomp out 100 little horses, it's like that's not very heroic. But if what will people think? You're covered in blood and stuff coming out of the arena or whatever. That's like, what the fuck? But if you've defeated like this giant scary duck, that seems kind of a David versus Goliath kind of situation. It seems like you probably did something good. Yeah. But also, I was thinking I would try to tame it, because if you had like a horse-sized duck, so you could. It's amphibious even, right? It's like, so you could like sit on its back and you could fly, or you could go, use that instead of a boat. That would be fucking cool, right? So
put a saddle on it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That'd be you'd be the coolest kid on the block. I mean, it's not quite as good. I'd rather have a dragon or something, obviously. But,
I mean, I'll take... Yeah.
But if
in the absence of a dragon.
Exactly. I'll take a giant duck.
A giant duck any day of the week.
Yeah. Yeah, have to. I guess you'd have to make like giant loaves of bread to feed it.
Yeah, you'd be buggered. That'd be taking care of that thing would be the rest of your life. That'd be, assuming its life expectancy is proportional. But anyway, I think we've answered that question, right?
I think we could do a whole podcast episode on it, to be honest.
Yeah, let us know if you want us to do a full podcast
deep
episode.
Dive into how to tame a horse-sized duck.
Deep dive, episode 033. Okay, so
that is all.
I think that's all for today, guys.
Also, if you're listening to this on iTunes, you can help us out by leaving a review there. I've been told that helps, right? Helps more people discover this podcast. So if you feel like you're listening to this, you're getting value out of this, it could be good for other people, that would be really cool. If you could leave a review on iTunes or Apple Podcasts, actually, as it's called now. And also, maybe you've noticed we don't have any sponsors, we don't have any ad breaks, we don't annoy you with stories about what pillows you need to buy or anything like that.
Nor will we.
Nor will we. But you can help us out by leaving a review. And also, you can leave comments if you have, suggestions for stuff you think we should talk about, or you have questions or anything like that. You can also leave a comment on YouTube or on our website.
Okay. Thanks again, guys. Have a good week, and see you next week.